You're listening to Edgereel, skill thrills and business chills. Join hosts Laura and Brian as they explore the skills and insights you need to succeed in today's business world. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, you ready to ditch that feeling of work for good? Because today we're diving deep into changing careers.
And not just like finding a new job, but like figuring out a career that you'd actually, be excited to wake up for.
You guys sent in this Indeed article, How to Change Careers, a step-by-step guide, and let me tell you, it is packed with advice.
It really is. Like, it lays everything out so clearly, and it's not just some fluffy feel-good stuff. There's actual practical advice in there.
Right, like step 1, it talks about figuring out if you're actually unhappy in your current job, which, let's be real, is a question a lot of us ask ourselves at some point.
Oh, for sure. And it's not always obvious. Sometimes it's just this general feeling of blah.
Totally. But this article, they suggest keeping a job satisfaction log.
Oh, that's a good one. I was skeptical at first, but it really helps pinpoint what's really bugging you.
Okay, so tell me more about that, because how does that work? Do you just write down every time you feel frustrated at work?
It's more about getting specific, like instead of just saying, my boss is the worst, which, maybe, but instead of that, think about what specifically bugs you.
Okay, so is it that they micromanage you? Or that they don't give you enough support?
Exactly. Or maybe it's not even about your boss, right? Maybe it's the actual work itself. Like, are you using your skills? Are you learning anything new?
That's so true. Sometimes I get stuck in this rut of, this is just what I do, and forget to ask myself if I actually even enjoy it.
And that's where this article is so helpful. It forces you to, hit the pause button and really examine those feelings.
Okay, so let's say we've done the job satisfaction log. We've figured out what's making us unhappy. Then what?
Well, then comes the fun part. The article dives into self-discovery. It's all about rediscovering your strengths and passions.
Okay, because sometimes it feels like you lose sight of those things when you've been in a job for a while,
Totally. It's like you get so used to your job title that you forget about all the other amazing things you're good at and, more importantly, that you enjoy doing.
So how do we rediscover those things? Do we just sit around and brainstorm? Because honestly, sometimes my brain feels totally blank.
It can feel overwhelming. But the article has some great tips for that. One thing they suggest is looking beyond your resume. So think about your hobbies, the things you do for fun. What are you naturally drawn to?
Okay, yeah. For me, it's writing. I love to write, even if it's just journaling or whatever.
Yeah.
But how does that translate into a career?
Well, that's where you got to get creative, right? Maybe you could be a copywriter or content creator or a journalist.
I see what you mean. It's about seeing those skills and interests in a new light, how they could apply to a different field.
Exactly. And the article even talks about using those online career quizzes, which, they can be cheesy, but they can also spark some ideas.
I'm all about a good personality quiz, even for my career.
Right. And sometimes just seeing those suggestions can help you make connections you might not have thought of on your own. Oh, I never thought about that field, but now that I see it, it makes total sense.
Okay, so we figured out what we don't like about our current situation. We've started to tap into our strengths and passions. Then what? How do we actually start exploring different career paths? Because it can feel so overwhelming. Where do you even begin?
You can feel like you're staring into this giant black hole of possibilities.
Right, exactly. And that's where I tend to freeze up.
Totally get it. But here's where the article's advice comes in clutch. They actually suggest looking at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Okay, now we're getting into some serious research here. But why that specific resource? What can we learn from that?
It's not just about unemployment rates and stuff, although that's important too. But they have data on job growth projections.
Oh, interesting. So you can see which industries are actually, hiring and growing, which is super important, especially in today's job market.
Exactly. It's all about being strategic, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to put all your energy into a field that's shrinking.
That's a really good point. So we're looking at industries that are growing. We're tapping into our own strengths and passions. But sometimes it feels like there's this gap, right? How do you bridge the gap between this is what I'm interested in and this is an actual job I could see myself doing?
It's like that saying, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
There might be amazing jobs out there that you've never even heard of.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do we find those hidden gems?
Well, the article is big on informational interviews, which can sound kind of intimidating, but they're really just conversations.
Conversations with who? CEOs and industry leaders?
Not necessarily, although, hey, if you can swing it, go for it. But it's more about connecting with people who are actually doing the jobs you're curious about.
Okay, so like finding people on LinkedIn or something and just reaching out.
Yeah. And you'd be surprised how many people are willing to chat, especially if you're upfront about wanting to learn from their experience.
So it's less about asking for a job and more about picking their brain about their career path.
Exactly. You can ask them things like, what's a typical day like in your role? Or what skills are most important in this field?
That's actually really smart. It takes the pressure off and opens up the conversation for genuine connection.
And sometimes those conversations can lead to unexpected opportunities, like maybe they know of an opening at their company, or maybe they just offer some valuable advice that helps you move forward.
I love those aha moments. Okay, so we're talking about big changes here, potentially even stepping into a whole new industry.
Which can feel exciting and terrifying all at once, right?
Exactly. But before we spiral, let's talk about how to turn those career dreams into a solid plan. Because, daydreaming is fun, but action gets results. Okay, so we've chatted about figuring out if you're actually unhappy. We've talked about tapping into your strengths and passions, maybe even finding a new industry that excites you. But how do we actually make this whole career pivot thing happen?
That's where things get really exciting, because now we're talking about turning those dreams into action.
Love it. So where do we start?
This article, they call it Building Your Action Plan, which I think is so key because it's easy to get overwhelmed by this whole, life change thing.
Totally. It feels huge when you say it like that.
Right. But having a plan, it breaks it down into manageable steps,
Okay, that makes me feel better already. So walk me through those steps. What's step one in this action plan?
Well, they're big on setting clear goals. And not just oh, I want a new job, but get specific.
Okay, so give me an example.
Instead of just saying, I want to work in tech, you could say, I want to be a UX designer for a tech startup, within a year.
Okay, yeah, that's way more concrete. Having a timeline, too, I like that.
It gives you something to work towards,
For sure. But what about, what if my skills aren't quite there yet? That's always my biggest fear.
It's so common. But the article talks about identifying your skills gaps. So let's say you want to be that UX designer, but you've never actually, designed anything.
Yeah, been there. Then what? Do I need to, go back to school or something?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe you just need to take some online courses or, there are tons of resources out there now.
Okay, that's good to know. It doesn't have to be this big, scary thing.
Exactly. Think of it as investing in yourself.
Love that. Investment in my future awesome career. But be honest, how long does this stuff actually take? Because I gotta be real, I'm impatient.
Oh, I feel you. And this is where it gets really personal because there's no one-size-fits-all timeline.
Okay, that makes sense.
Are you switching industries completely or are you just trying to, move up in your current field?
Right. And I guess, how much time and energy am I willing to put into this? Because let's be real, this is going to take work.
It definitely does, but it's so worth it, to find a career that you actually love.
Okay, I'm convinced. So let's say I've got my goals, I'm working on my skills, and I even have a somewhat realistic timeline in mind. Then what?
Then comes the part where you got to convince someone to actually hire you for this new dream career, which can feel like a whole other challenge.
It's like, hey, I'm new at this, but trust me, I'd be amazing.
Right. And that's where I think this article's advice about rebranding comes in. How do you take your past experience and make it relevant to this new path you're on?
Okay, that's a good point, because it's not like you can just erase your entire work history.
Exactly. It's more about reframing it, highlighting those transferable skills, the things you've learned along the way that apply, even if it's not immediately obvious.
Give me an example.
Okay, let's say you've been a teacher for years, but now you want to get into, marketing.
Okay, I can see where that could be a tough sell.
Right, but think about it. Teachers are amazing communicators. They understand how to engage an audience. They're masters of organization and, crisis management.
Okay, when you put it like that, it makes total sense.
Right. It's all about framing those skills in a way that resonates with the new field you're trying to break into.
So instead of saying I taught third grade, I could say I successfully managed and motivated a classroom of 30 tiny humans.
Exactly. Or I developed engaging and informative lesson plans that kept students engaged and eager to learn.
Okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down. It's about showcasing those accomplishments, even if they happened in a different context.
And highlighting those transferable skills, because those are gold.
This is giving me so much more confidence. Okay, but even with all of this, the goals, the skills, the killer resume, there's still that fear, what if I make this big leap and then I hate it?
Totally valid. And that's why the article talks about the importance of, trying on different roles before you fully commit.
Okay, tell me more about this.
So think about it like dipping your toes in the water before you do a cannonball,
I like it. So how do we do that career-wise?
Well, they suggest things like shadowing someone in your desired field, or maybe even like freelancing on the side, just to get a taste of what it's actually like.
Oh, that's a good idea because sometimes the reality of a job is different from what we imagine.
Totally. And volunteering can be a great way to do that too, especially if you're trying to switch fields completely.
So you can gain some experience and build your network at the same time.
Exactly. And if those options aren't feasible, the article also mentions like maybe pursuing further education or certifications.
Because sometimes you do need that extra boost, that extra knowledge or that piece of paper to really feel confident making that leap. Okay, so we've talked about identifying those transferable skills, building a killer resume, even dipping our toes into a new field before diving in head first. But let's be real, even with all the prep in the world, this whole career change thing can feel kind of scary, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a big decision. And there are always those what ifs swirling around.
Exactly. So how do you deal with those doubts? Like, what if it doesn't work out? What if I'm making a huge mistake?
I think it's about acknowledging those fears because they're totally valid, but not letting them paralyze you.
Easier said than done, right?
Right. Which is where I think having a strong support system is so important.
You mean like friends and family who are cheering you on?
Them too, for sure. But the article also talks about finding a mentor or a career coach, someone who's been there, done that, and can offer guidance from like a place of experience.
I love that. It's like having your own personal Yoda guiding you on your career journey.
Exactly. Because sometimes you just need someone to like bounce ideas off of or get a pep talk when you're feeling discouraged.
Okay, I'm sold. How do I find this career Yoda?
Well, the article mentions online platforms, professional networking groups, even reaching out to alumni from your school.
So it's about tapping into your network, putting yourself out there, and just asking.
Exactly. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to help if you just ask.
That's a good reminder. Okay, so we've got our Yoda, we've got our support system, we've done all the prep work. But what about those moments when you're like sending out resumes into the void and hearing nothing back?
The dreaded job search silence. It's tough, for sure.
It can really mess with your confidence, you know?
Totally. And that's why I think it's so important to remember that you are not your job applications.
Okay, I need to write that on a sticky note and put it on my mirror.
Seriously. Just because you didn't get this job, it doesn't mean you're not talented or worthy.
That is so true. It's easy to get caught up in those rejections and start to internalize them.
Absolutely. And that's why self-care is so crucial during a job search, maybe even more so than usual.
Okay, preach. Self-care is not selfish. But what does that look like, practically speaking, when you're in the middle of a career change?
I think it's about finding those things that bring you joy and help you recharge and making time for them, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
So like taking a walk in nature, reading a good book, whatever fills your cup.
Exactly. And it's also about celebrating those small wins along the way.
You mean like giving yourself a high five for updating your resume?
Yes. Or like nailing that interview, even if you don't get the job.
I love that. It's about recognizing our own efforts and progress, even when it feels like we're not where we want to be yet.
Exactly. Because this whole career change journey, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
And like any good marathon, you got to pace yourself, you got to hydrate, you got to celebrate those milestones along the way.
Yes. And you got to remember why you started running in the first place.
So true. It's about connecting back to that why, that passion, that vision for your future. Because that's what's going to keep you going when things get tough.
And trust me, there will be tough moments. There will be rejections. There will be setbacks. There will be days when you just want to crawl under the covers and eat ice cream.
Been there. So what do we do when those moments hit? How do we pick ourselves up and keep going?
I think it's about giving ourselves permission to feel those feelings, to have those moments of doubt or discouragement, but not letting them derail us completely.
Easier said than done.
For sure.
Yeah.
But that's where I think having that clear vision for your future is so key.
You mean knowing what you want and why you want it?
Exactly. Because when you're clear on your why, those tough moments become less about like personal failure and more about like course correction.
Okay, I like that. It's like, okay, this didn't work out the way I planned, but that's okay. I'm going to adjust my sails and keep moving forward.
Exactly. Because you're not a failure. You're just figuring it out.
Yeah.
And we're all figuring it out, you know.
So true. Okay, This has been such an inspiring conversation. I feel like we've covered so much ground today, from identifying those dream careers to actually making them a reality.
We've talked about everything from self-discovery and setting clear goals to building a killer resume and rocking those informational interviews.
And we can't forget about the importance of self-care, finding a mentor, and building a support system that cheers you on every step of the way.
Because at the end of the day, changing careers is a journey. And like any good journey, it's best enjoyed with a good map, supportive travel companions, and a whole lot of snacks.
Yes, and maybe a career Yoda to guide you along the way. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. We hope you feel inspired, empowered, and ready to take that next step towards your dream career.
And remember, you've got this.
We're cheering you on every step of the way. Until next time, keep dreaming big, keep learning, and never stop believing in the power of possibility.